Good morning. I'm Jacqueline Oskerko, the Director of Conference and Events for CAI New Jersey. I'd like to welcome all of our attendees and thank our partners and the Board of Directors, as well as the CAI team for today's program. Just a few housekeeping rules. All participants will be muted throughout the presentation. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box and make sure that you state the panelists that you would like the questions directed towards. If you need a certificate for manager credits, please email me at Jacqueline, Jaclyn, at CAI-NJ.org. And just a side note, you must be in attendance for the entire presentation to qualify for a certificate. I would now like to introduce Steve Roderick from our membership committee.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. My name is Steve Roderick. I'm Assistant Vice President over at JGS Insurance, and I am a member of the CAI membership committee. So they asked me to come here and speak with you guys for just a couple of minutes. I'll be quick, I promise. To remind all of you participating to be sure to renew your memberships, or if you're new to the organization, to inquire about becoming a member. For you homeowner leaders, CAI members have access to the CAI New Jersey's ADR program, which is a very cost-effective way to fulfill your association's legal obligations when you run into an ADR type situation. We all know that the best community associations have the best boards. They're educated, they're knowledgeable, and prepared to lead their communities successfully. Use the many CAI resources and help your board succeed. CAI provides an extensive, I'm talking robust library of content for community leaders, as well as ongoing virtual learning opportunities, because we're going to be stuck with this for a little while. The virtual environment's here. We're all getting a little bit better at it, a little more used to it. Some of us are getting a little zoomed out, but we got to stay safe. We got to stay healthy. So let's stick with it. CAI is doing a great job with the virtual platforms and keeping you guys in contact with the people you need to be in contact with. You gain access to industry leaders in such areas as accounting, engineering, legal, and of course, insurance professionals such as myself. And I believe we have an insurance panelist here today as well, that you guys are going to listen to a little bit later. I should also mention you have 3 to 15 board members and key volunteers that you can get added at one very, very low price. So save the date for our Community Associations Roundtable discussion tomorrow. Again, it's tomorrow, December 17th, where it's free for homeowner leaders and managers to attend. For all you managers and management companies out there, you get access to print and online directory of industry leaders to help communities navigate these unparalleled times. Earning continuing education credits is also really, really easy through CAI. We all need that stuff. I need that stuff. You guys need that stuff. So your CE credits are going to be a lot easier to get through CAI, and usually get a discount on that as well. You can utilize our 2020 virtual trade show catalog, which will help you navigate through all of our top industry professionals. So now for you business partners such as myself, you get a continued opportunity to build your brand, and we are committed to helping you with platforms such as Zoom, such as GoToMeeting like this one, and making your lives a little bit easier. Some people aren't very computer savvy, some are. I happen to not be. I have an IT department, but we're not in the office, so I don't always have access to it. So there's a lot of people in CAI that are very, very handy with this sort of thing. And really the networking opportunities that we're doing online really help out with you guys, because otherwise a lot of us would be lost out there as to who to turn to and how to network with people. So connecting virtually becomes very, very critical. You also get the membership directory. Now, I keep mine right here. This thing is gold. This thing is priceless. It's tabbed. It's easy to follow. This thing is awesome for when you're trying to find some sort of business partner, whether it's a landscaper, restoration company, whether it's insurance, whether it's painting, whether it's whatever you guys might need, snow removal, paving, roofing, all of that stuff is right here. And I keep it right on my desk. So when I'm looking for somebody, I'm trying to help out a board, I'm trying to help out a manager, trying to help somebody out, find a trusted contractor. This thing is priceless. We do have some upcoming events, so in just a couple seconds and I'll be out of here. The virtual expo launched a few weeks ago, so please visit CAI-NJ.org to see the schedule of videos, releases. You guys should really flip through that stuff. There's some gold in there. There's some really good stuff. Some of it's very, very professionally done. Some of it's off the cuff. Some of it's funny. Some of it's funny haha. Some of it's funny weird. But it's all really good content, and it gives you an idea and puts a face on who you want to be dealing with. So use that virtual expo. Wednesday webinars. Every Wednesday at noon, right here, just like today. We have our Wednesday webinars for those who need accreditation. Also, our PAC committee is hosting a holiday beer and cheer virtual tasting event on Wednesday. December 16th, excuse me, December 16th, that's Wednesday, at 6:30 p.m. Visit the website to learn more on attending this virtual tasting while contributing to the Political Action Committee. Now, just if you guys don't know anything about the Political Action Committee, these guys are on the front lines. They're really, really influential. They work with the state and bureaucracy and try to power through the red tape. So that's a critical organization. Support the PAC. If you don't know what it is, look it up on our website. It's the Political Action Committee, and these guys really, really fight hard for us to keep the legislation in check. Lastly, let's help out our FAST committee, spread some holiday cheer, and donate to our adoptive family. We'll be adopting multiple families to ensure that they get to enjoy the holiday season through Interfaith Neighbors, the local Monmouth County organization. We're asking that members support the initiative by sending gift cards and donations to be used for purchasing gifts to the CAI New Jersey office. Your help and support is greatly appreciated to bring cheer this holiday season to multiple families. If you guys have any questions about renewing or becoming a member, you can always contact me, or you can contact CAI New Jersey. Thank you guys very much for having me.
Thanks so much, Steve. Steve mentioned a whole lot of information about some upcoming programs, but don't forget to register for this Friday's HOA Feud. We also have our partner program, which is now open. If anybody would like to join the partnership program, the deadline to do so is December 14th, so you have about a month. If you have questions about that, you can reach out to Robin in our office at Robin, R-O-B-I-N, at CAI-NJ.org. And I know that Steve had mentioned our upcoming roundtable discussion. The date is actually December 17th, so just keep that on your calendar, and you can feel free to register on our website.
What did I say? I thought I said the 17th.
If you said November.
Oh, I did? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm so mixed up with this roundtable, but December, no problem. Thanks.
My bad.
All right, so let's move on to our presentation now. At Rainbow G&J Painting, Matt, who works on the commercial side of the company, spending the majority of his time working with property managers, helping them complete power washing, painting, and carpentry projects in their community. Matt is fully involved with all aspects of a project, from the beginning stages in developing project specifications and estimating, to project coordination and all other phases management. Matt communicates directly with property managers. While working in a community, Matt's main focus is to ensure good communication with residents and managers, meeting project deadlines, and a beautiful end result. So let's welcome Matt, who's going to speak about proactive painting will save money.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day. As Jackie just mentioned, today I'll be talking about how proactive painting in your community, your home, a building you may manage, will save you money in the long term, and how painting isn't only something that's a matter of cosmetics or a matter of beautifying your home. Yes, of course, inherently in painting, you are getting the added benefit of a freshly painted surface is going to give you a clean, fresh, new look. However, in addition, and more importantly for exterior projects, painting, staining, any type of coating is also sealing that surface and making sure it's properly protected from the elements, especially here living in New Jersey, where we all know we have the extremes of very cold weather to very warm weather. So a lot of different climate change with that. So one disclosure I want to make before continuing any further is with painting, obviously, it's more so about protecting the natural products, you know, most commonly wood or any other natural product that's on the exterior of a home. Obviously, man-made products such as PVC, AZAC, vinyls, plastics, things like that, you know, the cosmetic aspect of painting more so applies to that, where they don't necessarily need to be coated. So in addition to those man-made products, as I'm sure you guys are all well aware, there are a lot of other exterior products, surfaces on homes that are made of natural substrates, such as wood. So I want to get into today talking about some problems that could occur from leaving these surfaces unpainted for too long, kind of playing that risk game of with Mother Nature and the ways that communities that you as a homeowner, building managers can be proactive about it and put in implement ideas to make sure that you're on a schedule where you're not having to worry about these problems and how in the long term you will save money. So first off, I want to identify some problems. So one problem is obviously waiting too long. So surfaces, they begin to weather, they begin to rot. How does this happen? Well, living in New Jersey, as I mentioned before, we have extreme climate changes of weather dropping really low, temperatures, and then raising up. You know, perfect example of right now, we're in a cold front here. But then later this week, I know it's going to be getting up into the 60s. So substrates on the exterior of a home, examples of that could be siding, you have trim, you have exterior decorative moldings, you have decks. All of these could be made of wood. So it's very important, especially in coming into the winter months, that these surfaces are protected. So just think about, you know, with the weather changing, like I was saying, you have a piece of cedar siding on a home that is not very thick, but it also plays a very important role in protecting the insides of your home. This piece of wood, if it's not coated, if it's not protected with stain going into winter months, it's going to become brittle. It's going to eventually crack. Any types of these cracks, you leave exposures of bare wood where you have any type of moisture. The moisture is going to come in and eventually start the rotting process. So that's one problem that will inherently happen with leaving any type of natural product untreated for too long. Another problem that could happen is, and it pertains to what we were just mentioning before, the siding and trim. These are exterior components of a home that serve a big role in protecting the insides of the home. You know, surfaces such as the framework, the insulation, the sheathing of a home, the vapor barriers, the tie-back home wrap. So these are the exterior components that are protecting the insides. Obviously, the insides play a big role in the foundation of a home, and it is what structurally makes it sound. So it's very important to protect these, because if you leave some siding or some trim that's rotted too long and it's weathering, eventually you're going to run into problems where the framing is going to be compromised in that one specific area where there's any type of water getting in, because your siding is not protected, because your siding was cracked, water got in there, began to rot, the rot wasn't identified, wasn't replaced. You're now going to have problems with the framework, the sheathing. You're going to have to spend additional costs on having to go into those areas, not knowing how long it will take, not knowing the scope of work, because you have to remove a lot of things. So as you can see, the costs will eventually build up, and these are all costs that are not factored in for budgetary purposes. They're just not identified. They're not foreseen, but unfortunately they do happen. So that kind of just goes along into my next problem that I was going to identify, is the replacement costs. They become very expensive. Not only do you have to worry about the siding and trim, eventually you'll have to worry about the insides of your home, and you know, that creates concerns with some people. So another surface that I wanted to get into and talking about are decks. Now, there are many decks out there that are composite. They're made of the Trex material where you don't have to worry about any of this. However, there are still a significant amount of decks that are still made with wood. That wood, all decking material, is a pressure treated lumber that has the added protection of it was pre-treated prior to, you know, withstand the elements, but that that advantage in the pressure treated only lasts for so long. So it is important to make sure that you're on a schedule with applying a stain to that deck to give it that added protection. Because if you're looking, most people are not looking to just get 5-10 years out of a deck. They're looking to get 20 plus years out of a deck. A deck is a big investment. So proactively staining, getting on a schedule with decks will significantly extend the longevity of their lives, getting more money out of it. So those are some of the problems in waiting too long to paint or stain different surfaces, and how in the end expenses could build up. Now I'm going to get into a little bit what I've seen in working with different property managers, different building managers through the state of New Jersey, how they avoid these problems, and how they carry and implement these painting structure schedules through their communities and different properties they manage. So the most common one is getting onto a cyclical painting schedule. So obviously, we have budgets to keep in mind with all communities, all homeowners associations, all condo associations. And if you have a community that's 50, 60 buildings, it may just not make sense. It's not feasible to go in there and power wash and paint every single building in 1 year. So what they do is you'll go on a schedule where every year you pick different sections of the community. So to make my math simple, let's say there's 40 buildings. Every year over a 5-year period, they'll identify a certain area of 8 buildings that they will choose to power wash and stain. So that cycle just continues through, and then after the first cycle of 5 years going through, you're now going to pick up in that 6th year on buildings that were painted in year 1. And doing it that way, you take away the planning, you take away the having to worry about, is this certain section ready to be painted? Does it need to be painted now? Can we extend it another year, another 2 years? You always want to be within that 4 to 5 year period of waiting to repaint, restain, depending on the different scopes of the project. So that takes away the planning aspect of it, where you're on a schedule, it's going to happen every year. And in doing that every year, an added benefit of it is you're not going to come across now in the next phase of the cycle, when you're going back to those buildings that were painted in year 1, in year 6, you're going to find that there's going to be a lot less wood that needs to be replaced. If you're dealing with a that has all cedar siding with wooden
Hey, Matt, I just have to interrupt for 1 second. Oh, I don't think Matt can hear me.
framework, anything like that being potentially compromised. Along with that too is a lot of communities, they go and they battle between the discussion of 1 versus 2 coats. So of course it's all dependent on the community you're in, how much sunlight it receives, what type of materials you're going to be painting and staining. So that's all something that needs to be really identified by an industry professional. But to give an example from our company, we completed a full 5-year painting cycle at one community where there was 50 plus homes in Jamesburg, New Jersey. And after the first year, where it was only implemented, they only wanted 1 coat of stain applied. We now come back to the second cycle. We're now in year 6, and we found that there still was a decent amount of wood that needed to be replaced. And, this wood cost was, really adding up and increasing and past the budget points of where the community wanted to be. So it was decided that from there, they would be switching over to 2 coats. And now if you fast forward another 5 years after they implemented that 2 coat idea, of, really adding on another layer of protection, they had barely any wood that needed to be replaced, and the wood replacement cost was significantly less money than what it would have been to do in a second coat of stain. So it really worked out in the end. So what I can say is there's a big factor in, you really have to spec the project out the right way. You want to make sure that you're meeting all the different the climate, meeting all the different regulations with how the climate will change. So it's definitely important to seek an industry professional for their opinion and sit down with them and just make sure that the project's spec'd out the right way. But that's what I have for talking about how proactive painting could save money in the long term. So at this point, I open it up if there's any questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has questions, you can put them into our question box. We do have a couple here, but if you have any more, feel free to send them over. Our first one is, what are some examples of the most common problems that result from waiting too long to paint or stain exterior surfaces on the exterior of a building?
So the most common problem would be rotted wood. You're going to find that specifically, in areas where siding meets trim. And again, it's something that you really want to be really on top of, because it may not be something that you're going to be identifying when you're walking by the building from 20 feet away. So you may think that the building looks good, but if you go up and close to it, you're going to find that this rot has been there. It could have been there for a little while, and it's sitting on top of the sheathing and the framework inside, where more problems could come. So those are definitely the most common problems.
And how do you know when it is time to paint or stain?
You're gonna know, like I said, you really want to get up close and really, identify the surface that you are going to be painting or staining. But you're going to tell by the brittleness of the substrate. You're going to tell by if there's any chipping, flaking, bare wood exposed areas. So again, it's seeking out and making sure that you have someone that is the right person to be looking at this to make that decision, seeking an industry professional, but it will vary with all different types of surfaces.
All right, that is all the questions I have for right now. Again, if you have any further questions for Matt, please put them into the question box and we can circle back around to them at the end of the presentations. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move over to Paul. Paul McGleary has over 15 years of experience dealing with properties and the impacts of contaminants, water, and mold damage on those properties. He has spent 10 years inspecting homes for mold and damage caused by mold and water. He is also an IICRC certified in fire and smoke restoration. Paul has a thorough understanding of the recovery process after a disaster and can share many of his experiences as they relate to the current challenges. Paul works with his clients to develop and implement recovery plans for their properties. Today, Paul is going to be talking about water involving multiple units from a restoration standpoint. Welcome, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you everyone for attending today. It's my pleasure to share some information with you regarding water damage in multiple units. There are three categories of water, and I think to understand water damage, we have to understand what are we dealing with. So the three categories would be 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 originates from a potable or sanitary source, and it really presents little or no hazard from the clean or potable water itself. It could expand the risk if there's hazardous materials where the water comes in contact, including electrical wiring or devices. Category 2 contains some significant contamination. It can cause potential sickness in humans and animals, and it can present a moderate risk from the presence of gray water. Typically standard PPE like coveralls, waterproof boots, rubber gloves, these types of things should be worn by all workers, and they should be aware of what incidental materials are on the job may present a health and safety risk. And with that information, the PPE should be adjusted accordingly. The third category is category 3, which is grossly contaminated water. And this water contains harmful pathogenic or toxigenic material. So category 3 water damage situations must be taken seriously. The presence of sewage and non-organic contaminants can be highly dangerous to the workers. And these effects can be immediate or long-term. And the cleanups require full body protection, as well as the contaminated materials be placed in biohazard containers. Commonly an entire biohazard suit is worn for this type of cleanup, along with air-assisted ventilation. So when you first come on site, you have to understand what are you dealing with, what category of water. And then the IICRC, which sets standards for mitigating these situations, further separates the intrusion into 4 classifications. So class 1 water damage, there's typically a minimal amount of water that has flowed into the materials, and the materials are typically low porosity, meaning the water is not getting into the materials. And typically this class of water damage requires limited mitigation and little moisture is left after the bulk of the water is removed, leaving a minimal amount of evaporation needed to finish the drying. So, typical examples of this might be a burst hot water tank on a sealed concrete floor, or an overflow toilet onto a tile floor. Class 2 water damage, where there's significant amount of water discharged and the exposed materials are medium to high porosity, there's a greater absorption of water into the materials, and the water damage process is lengthened by the volume of water that needs to be removed and lengthened drying time. So, an example of this might be a pressurized water line or pipe that's inside of a wallboard or a wooden floor joist system. So the drywall and the wood are going to absorb a greater amount of that water. Your class 3 water damage, where there's a large amount of water, regardless of its category, it's absorbed by highly porous materials. It results in the highest rate of evaporation necessary to affect that water damage process. So, examples of this might be a storm-forced leak, where you have floods into a building's interior, might soak into the carpets, a broken water main filling an underground parking area, things where we're talking about high volumes of water. And then last would be the class 4 water damage, where water intrudes into and is trapped by the building materials and assemblies, which makes the restoration process a little bit more difficult and time consuming. And as you can imagine, along with that comes an expense. Affected areas are typically highly porous. They're tightly confined. They may require special methods of equipment, longer drying time, or substantial vapor pressure differentials, meaning you want to pressurize the area to get the water out. Examples might be stormwater flooding of a wooden or plaster masonry or concrete enclosure, or a severe sewage backup that permeates the floor and the wall systems. So once categories and classification of water has been assessed, you can then take the proper steps to mitigate and repair the damage. Typically, flood damage to a factory from black water will require a different process than a potable water spill in an office building. So each range of categories compounded by the class of water intrusion will require different skills for assessing the damage and the right remediation process and equipment. So, what is water mitigation? Typically water damage restoration shouldn't stop just at restoring back your real estate to proper functioning, you want to inspect the underlying causes that cause the water damage in the first place and make sure that it won't be a reoccurrence. You want to repair structures, replace the materials, and make your property safe for the years to come. If your property's been exposed to water damage, you may have to do water mitigation. There's strict actions that are required in that mitigation, such as removal of damaged materials, drywall, and wooden flooring that may not be able to be dried. Because if not, mold and mildew may accumulate if you don't get the structure dry in a timely manner. So you want to remove those materials that can't be dried in place, and you want to sanitize the areas to restore a healthy environment. Further cleaning and deodorizing should be done to make sure that you're back to where you need to be. So once that's done, the water damage should happen immediately after the flooding or water buildup, because it really only takes 48 to 72 hours with the right conditions for mold to start growing. There's mold spores everywhere. It's in the air. You see on the news, you get the mold reports. And typically, once you have high humidity and warm temperatures and a food source being drywall or a wood structure, you can then have mold growth. So you want to jump on that immediately and mitigate the situation. So, if you have an older property, it may take time to replace some materials, or it may be time to replace some of those materials, such as pipes that are getting old. They may be seeping or leaking some joints. Those are some things that you want to prevent a sudden occurrence or a pipe burst. And if the pipes are behind the walls, it may be a more extensive repair. But these are some things that you're going to want to inspect in your buildings and have a good feel for whether you need to set some funds aside for that, rather than having a water issue and needing to call in somebody in the middle of the night, because these things always happen in the middle of the night. And the water mitigation process typically is going to depend on how long your property's been exposed to water. Dehumidifiers and drying equipment can be turned on round the clock in areas with severe water damage. The mold spores can be removed using air filtration systems. So there's equipment out there that is used to mitigate these damages and minimize the health impacts of these situations. So it's important to monitor temperature and humidity and moisture levels in the building, in the air, as well as in the structure, to ensure that the building has been restored back to normal standards after an occurrence. So, the key takeaways are to act quickly and do a thorough job, because shortcuts are costly. Just like with painting, shortcuts that are taken can be costly down the road. Water damage is truly a problematic situation because it can cause structural damage and even adversely affect the healthy environment of the building. So if you have a continued rainfall situation or burst and leaking pipes, they're the typical culprits for water damage. In buildings that are sprinklered, someone may hit a sprinkler head, or a sprinkler head may go off as a result of a cooking mishap. And these pipes put out a lot of water, so it's important to act quickly. If water builds up in a certain area, it's important to start your flood damage cleanup by shutting off the water source and start extracting the water, whether it be with a shop vac, extractors, in case of a large loss, a truck-mounted extractor, to start that process of mitigation. Mopping an area if it's not a carpeted area, if it's a hard floor surface. If you have furniture in the area, in individual units, it's good to block that up off the floor so it doesn't wick up water and moisture and get damaged. Some of these things can help mitigate the size of a claim, and I'll let Eric talk about that when he discusses insurance next. So, carpeting and rugs should be removed immediately and laid outside to dry if they can. If water damage occurs in the summer, open the doors and the windows and let the air in to aid in the drying process as well. Close things that are not affected, such as rooms that are not affected, or closets and cabinets. This way, you're not trying to dry a larger area than needs to be. If in the case of a damaged ceiling, you should be given immediate attention to that because of the risk of the drywall dropping and hitting someone or causing further damage as a result of falling off the ceiling, because when the drywall gets wet, it gets very heavy. So, if you have a leak in the ceiling, you want to check for the source of those leaks and repair them immediately, whether it be a roof leak or a pipe. Typically those more porous materials are what's more susceptible to damage, and that would include your furniture's upholstery, your carpeting, insulation. Insulation needs to be removed if it gets wet. So, many times that will add to the cost of a repair, because you need to remove the drywall, which may have been able to be dried in place, to get to the insulation. And more often than not, you're going to have to replace many of the materials and contents in a home that gets wet and affected by water damage. So, how do you prevent water damage? Preventing water damage requires regular inspection and maintenance where the damage is likely to occur. Your basements, your attics, bathrooms, and kitchens, typically because they have water, sources, are the places where you can have those issues. So it's good to have an inspection there. Water can get in. Look for leaks around windows, foundations, things of that nature, and then preventing the water damage to your wood, as Matt talked about, is can be done with painting, waterproofing, and sealant. So the key takeaway here is inspect your buildings, try to prevent what you can, but when an event does occur, and unfortunately they do happen and they never happen at the most opportune time, you do need to act quickly at that time. So are there any questions regarding water damage to multiple units?
Yes. So what do you see as the role of the property manager when coordinating a multi-unit loss?
So typically when we're coordinating a multi-unit loss, the property manager is an integral part of the team, because they're coordinating communication with the unit owners, so we can have contact with them and gain access to their properties and their units to assess damage and act quickly. So, really they're the key to the communication and opening doors literally and figuratively with the individual unit owners.
Who coordinates the insurance coverage with the HOA and individual unit owners' coverages?
So without going too deep into insurance, I'm sure Eric's going to cover a lot of this, but typically we will work with multiple insurance carriers, the individual unit owners, for what they're responsible for as far as improvements and betterments. We'll work with the association's insurance for what's covered regarding the structure. And then we'll also work with the individual unit owners as far as contents coverage. So, typically the restoration company will quarterback that and coordinate that amongst the various carriers.
Great. That's all the questions I have for right now, but if you have any further questions for Paul, please put them into the question box and we can circle back around at the end. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you.
All right. Eric Eggert joined Mackoul Risk Solutions in 2013 as a commercial associate and quickly moved into his current role as a business development specialist. He is well versed in all types of insurance and is licensed to sell and service both property and casualty insurance, and also life, accident, and health insurance. As a certified insurance counselor and a community insurance and risk management specialist, he brings over 7 years of experience in insurance and risk management. Mackoul Risk Solutions insures close to 1,500 condominium associations and cooperative buildings throughout New Jersey and New York. Eric is now going to talk to us about water involving multiple units from an insurance standpoint. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you for that introduction, Jackie, and thank you, Paul and Matt, for the great information you guys gave. As Jackie mentioned, I'll be kind of picking up where Paul left off and going right into it from the insurance side of things. All right, a little disclaimer, every association is different. Everyone's governing documents are different. Everyone's insurance policy is different. So I'm going to try to cover generally each one without specifically, referencing any of your policies. So it's always important to make sure you check with your specific governing documents with your broker so they can check their insurance policy for you to make sure certain things apply to you. So jumping right in here, we're going to talk about responsibility within the unit. And there's usually two areas in the bylaws that discuss who's responsible for what within the unit. One is maintenance, the other is damage or destruction of. And an owner is almost always going to be responsible for the maintenance of anything that is exclusively within their unit. Right. You guys still see my screen? Okay, for some reason.
We don't see your PowerPoint yet, if you want to just.
Oh, it's not there?
Nope.
Oh, is it? You see it now?
No, I don't. Let's resend it. Oh, it looks like we just resent it again. Let's see if you can get that open.
Let's see. I'm not. I got it before and I accepted it when you asked to share my screen. And I said yes. Oh, sorry about this. It worked in our test right before we did it.
Hit the play button, Eric. Do you see that?
For the PowerPoint or something from GoToMeeting?
On GoTo, you should be able to hit the little play button under the sharing tab. Let's see if that's it.
Play button.
Everyone, we'll be right back with you.
I don't see a play button under the sharing tab. Okay, sharing, play. Okay, I got you now.
Let's see if that does it. No, I still don't see it. This is the virtual programs, right?
Yeah.
I know Brooke is working in the background on it.
Okay. Okay, here's a pop-up to show my screen. I'm gonna say yes, show my screen. And nothing?
No.
All right, I mean, I can, yeah, I don't know why that's not working. I mean, I can just go on without it, I guess, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right, so sorry if I repeat anything I just said, but so there's two areas within the bylaws. One's maintenance, the other is damage or destruction of. And the unit owner is almost always going to be responsible for anything that's exclusive, for maintenance that's exclusive to their unit, but would not be responsible for those same items when they're damaged. So in most instances, it's not what caused the damage, but what was actually damaged. There are two exceptions to that. One of them is negligence. So if somebody in unit 3J leaves their tub running, it overflows and causes water damage down to 2J and 1J. That's negligence on the part of the person in 3J, and it would be their responsibility to make the repairs. The other exception to this is deductible resolutions. And basically, if the bylaws or the governing documents indicate something different, the bylaws may state that if the leak started in your unit and did damage to your unit exclusively, then you're going to be responsible for those repairs. So again, it is important to always check your governing documents. Now, as far as the responsibility of the association, again, the governing documents are going to outline three different types of coverage that they would have. One of them is bare walls. Bare walls is basically the association is going to be responsible for the structure itself, the four walls, the ceiling, and the original floors within the unit. And the owner is going to be responsible for everything else, including partition walls. The next is all in. All in means that the association is going to be responsible for replacing the unit, including any improvement betterments made by the unit owners. So obviously there's a lot more coverage there than there is for bare walls. So all in coverage is a lot more comprehensive and it's going to be more expensive, but that means the association's on the hook for more. And the last one's actually the most common. It's a single entity, also known as original specifications. This means that the association is going to be responsible for replacing the unit back to its original condition when it was first built. So it's not when it was purchased by the owner, it's back to when it was first built. So maybe that person who lived there first upgraded some of the floors. Well, the policy is still going to only pay for what was originally put in. And then the owner itself would be responsible for any of those improvements or betterments. Typically in a co-op, if that applies to anybody, the owner is going to be responsible for things such as finishings like carpet and paint. There are ways to change this because the insurance policy does follow the bylaws. So there's ways to change your bylaws, which will change your insurance policy. You want to make sure that you're changing the bylaws before you change the policy. Now, what I mean by that is, obviously everyone who's on a board knows how difficult it is to change your bylaws. It's a whole legal process. You got to get votes. You got to get support from the community you live in. So it's a process, but it's something that you should do if you want to change how your governing documents read for your insurance policy. After that, then you want to change your insurance policy to follow that. There are certain carriers out there that actually let you pick what insuring agreement, whether it's bare walls, all in, or original specifications, that you want the policy to cover. Don't pick the one you want. Pick the one that your bylaws dictate that you should have. Now, bylaws are open to interpretation. So, you may want to consult with your attorney and you may want to consult with your insurance broker to get that figured out. But definitely make sure you're following what they say. Because if you think about it like this, if you as a board decide to, you guys have, your bylaws are written for all in, which again is the most expensive thing for your policy. They decide we don't want to pay for that. It's too much reliability, too much responsibility for us as the association. We shouldn't be on the hook for that. It should be on the unit owners. Let's change it to bare walls. Well, everybody that already moved in there agreed to those bylaws when they moved in. They sent them to their personal insurance brokers. Their personal insurance broker knew what policy to get based on those bylaws. Now, if you just decide off the cuff to go and do something else, well, you're in violation of what the governing documents say. So you're leaving yourself open to lawsuits because you could get sued by the unit owners. Let's say they have a claim that, now isn't covered, that should have been covered by the association, but it's not because we changed it. And now their personal insurance policy is not going to cover it because they specifically knew going into it that that's not their responsibility either. So it just creates a lot of headache, a lot of lawsuits, and it leaves the board open to getting sued for not following governing documents. So again, it's very important that if you want your policy to read differently, change your bylaws. Paul mentioned some of these coverages that are within a homeowner's policy. Improvements or betterments, that's any upgrades that you make. That's, again, majority of the time is going to be on you as a unit owner to cover your own improvements or that you make to your unit. Contents, that's your stuff. I like to describe it as if you were to pick up your unit and shake it. Everything that falls out is pretty much your contents that you want to make sure you're insuring. Anything that stays in generally is going to be the association's responsibility. You want to make sure you have additional living expenses in your policy. This will be the coverage for any extra expenses that you incur while you have to live elsewhere during the time of restoration of your unit because it's uninhabitable only due to a covered cause of loss. If it's not a covered cause of loss, unfortunately, that's not going to kick in as a coverage for you. You want to make sure you have personal liability, which is basically protection against you being sued by your association or other shareholders or residents or their insurance companies for something that may or may not have been your fault. And then lastly, loss assessments of coverage you want in your personal policy. This will basically be coverage if the association has a big claim. They have to issue an assessment to all the unit owners. Well, if it's due to a covered cause of loss, then your policy would actually pay your portion of that assessment for you so that doesn't come out of pocket. Obviously, if you're getting assessed for a new pool, policy is not going to contribute to that. It's only for a covered cause of a loss. And then as far as the association's policy, what happens to them in a water loss is there's 3 coverages that really apply. One of them is backup of sewers and drains. That's exactly how it sounds. It's the water backup from a sewer or drain. The other is broad form water. That's leakage or seepage into the building due to a backup of sewer and drain or underground water main. And then lastly, flood. That's surface water overflow of a natural body of water, and could actually, if it's big enough, could include backup of sewers and drains. Now, I wish you could see our presentation that I have here, because there's actually a picture of our office the day after Hurricane Sandy, and it's waterfront property at that point. But it's a pretty interesting picture for you. And I'll anyone who wants this presentation, I can definitely send it around. So feel free to ask Jackie for a copy, and I can make sure to supply that for you. What you want to do before you actually file a claim, once you do have water damage and you know that who's responsible for what, or even if you don't know who's responsible for what, you want to get that water out of there. As Paul mentioned, it's just because it's water damage doesn't mean it's just water. There could be chemicals, there could be sewage, there could be a lot of stuff in there that you don't know. So you definitely want to do that as quick as possible, like he said. But before you actually file that claim, you want to consider the deductible. How much is your deductible for something? If there's, if it's $6,500 worth of damage and your deductible is $5,000, do you really want to put that claim in for just $1,500 worth of damage? Claims are the #1 reason that insurance premiums do increase, and typically they're larger claims. And if there's one that you can avoid by a small claim and it's just a little bit higher or less than your deductible, then definitely consider that before actually filing the claim. So now that it's time to file that claim, it's a big enough loss, big enough damage here that we know that exceeds the deductible. We want to actually go through with it. It's important to do it as timely, in a manner as timely as possible, because that gives the insurance carrier time to send their adjuster out and actually inspect the damage property and investigate anything that may have been going on. Obviously, with water, we want to do this ASAP. As Paul mentioned, mold could come, further damage to your, the structure, the support of your entire unit could be affected if it sits there too long. So we want to get this stuff taken care of quick. As far as in the policies, there is not actually a specific time frame indicated in there, but with something like water that could create mold, they may say, well, had you remediated this sooner, the mold would have never happened. So we'll cover the water damage, but we're not going to cover the mold because you didn't act quick enough. So there are times like that where the insurance will cover portions, but not cover the entire thing. So definitely want to get those claims filed as soon as possible when they're water, because then it increases your chance of making the entire claim covered. So what do you do during a claim? So you've contacted Paul to come pick it up. You've contacted your insurance broker to put the claim in and get the adjuster out there. What are some things that you can do to kind of protect your interests and the interests of the association? Well, the association has the right to access any unit during the event of a loss or an emergency. So you definitely want to make sure that it's accessible to them so that they don't have to kick your door down or make it so it extends the time frame for the amount of time for them to get in there. And you really only want to make the emergency repairs at first and the emergency remediation because that does give the adjuster time to inspect everything. Take photographs of everything. Before you even start cleaning up, take photographs. Any defects at the time of the incident, any damage, anything that you can. There's never too many pictures for these type of things because maybe by the time the adjuster gets out there, Paul's already come in with his team and they've already cleaned it all up. So now it's just an open space that's what the adjuster's seeing. So I mean, if it's burst pipes, save those pipes so they can look at that, see what happened to them. Anything that you can that's going to help your case, it's important to do because again, it's only going to increase your chance of getting that claim covered and getting it so that you and your association are made whole again during these difficult times. So that's really the extent of it in a nutshell. I mean, obviously I could go into that much longer and much more detail, but that's really the extent of it. So if anyone, like I said, if anyone had any questions or any concerns, I could definitely send that presentation. I don't know if any came in at all while I was talking, Jackie, or?
Yep, yeah, we did have a few people request the presentation. So if you send it to me, I'll make sure that they get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, we do have a few questions. Our first one is, why should we file a claim on our association's master policy if the water damage was only inside one unit? Shouldn't this go through the unit owner's insurance policy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Oftentimes it ends up hitting both policies. And Paul kind of mentioned that as well when they deal with multiple parties, the association and the unit owner's insurance carriers, because again, as the bylaws read, certain aspects of that unit are going to be your responsibility and other aspects are going to be the association's responsibility. And obviously in either situation, it could be nobody's fault. That's what insurance is there for, sudden and incidental accidents. Yes, these things can get very annoying and can cause headache and stress between neighbors and the associations and the boards, but insurance is ultimately there to try to bring it back as best they can, make it whole, and try to make it as easy as possible. Obviously, everybody knows the insurance industry has their stereotypes for the opposite of that, but they do their best they can. They try to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And having a team come in there like Paul's is really good to speed things up because they do work with this type of stuff on a daily basis.
Do insurance carriers offer discounts for products or devices that mitigate damage?
Yes and no. Again, it's tough to really say yes to every insurance carrier or no to everyone because every carrier has their different guidelines and how they operate their companies. You're really going to see it more on the personal side of things than the actual building as a whole. There are things, what are they called? Like flood, water flow, I forget the name, but they're like you put them in crawl spaces and it kind of helps with the water. So if water gets in there and it gets to a point where it's, it's backing up from your sewer, well, then it can kind of drain out to the lawn. And I forget the exact name of those, but it's like a water flow vent or something like that. And there are carriers that will give discounts if you have those in. Sometimes it's the flood insurance carrier, but again, it's hard to really pick and choose, but you'd have to talk to your broker specifically about your carrier.
All right, so we have a scenario question here. So it says the scenario is in a townhome. Resident travels a lot and doesn't go into the basement much. She comes across damage, leak, mold that went unnoticed for an extensive period of time. How is the responsibility assigned?
Well, in that situation, they would have to they would try to figure out where the water came from. Is it something that came from that unit owner? Is it something because water travels? Is it something that came from next door and it went to them? So you have to try to figure out where it came from, how it happened to determine, is there going to be any coverage as far as the item that was leaking? Let's say it was a burst pipe. Well, what caused that pipe to burst? If it was, wear and tear because the pipe got old, that's not going to be covered. But if it was, that pipe was frozen and burst or, got hit by something, like a car, for example, if it hits a building, causes a leak later that goes into that unit, then that could be something that's covered. Either way, the damage is most likely going to get covered because you do have that coverage in your policy. But the mold, as I mentioned earlier, may not because it was sitting there for so long. They may say, well, if you would have told us about this when it first happened, yeah, we'd cover the mold and the water damage and the cleanup of that. Because it was so old, well, we're only going to cover the water damage. So every situation is different, but that's kind of their thought process when they do that.
All right. I had water damage in my unit and the board paid for everything without going through our association's insurance or my personal insurance. Is this a good way to handle water damage in the future?
I mean, that's tough because if a board's, they're basically setting a precedent at that point. If they do something for one unit owner, now they have to do that for every unit owner. Otherwise, they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit. At that point, then hopefully they have a directors and officers policy that would protect them and defend them in court. But again, as soon as you do something for one person, you have to do it for everybody because, if they do it for you and not me, I could say, oh, well, you did it for her because she's a woman and you're not doing it for me because I'm a man. It's something that simple that's like, oh, you know what? He's got a point. We did it for her, not him. And now all of a sudden it's an argument based on discriminating against me for my sex. So it's something you just want to be careful of and make sure that whatever you're doing, you stay consistent. And the best way to do that is to not make exceptions for people and try to do the nice thing for that person.
All right, that's all of the questions for today. All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody who participated. Eric, Matt, and Paul, thank you for your presentations. Again, if anybody needs a certificate or would like a piece, or like Eric's presentation, you can email me at Jaclyn, Jaclyn, at CAI-NJ.org. Otherwise, we will see you next week at the next Wednesday webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.